Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura. An electric quilt is known for their quilting programs where we can design quilts, or for their printables, such as their printing on fabric sheets. But they also have newsprint sheets. So a newsprint sheet is paper that's thinner than printer paper. So we can stitch on top of it and it tears away really easy. So it makes our stitching a lot of fun. Now there are two things that electric quilt can do that really makes it fun to use these newsprint papers. One, of course, is foundation piecing. So if we ever have a block that we're having a little trouble with, we can foundation piece it. There's also quilting designs. So we can print out actual quilting designs on the paper, put that right on top of our quilt right over top of it, tear it off, and we have those designs, so we do not need to mark our quilts. So let's go right to electric quilt. I'll open up a program and show you how to print some foundation piecing and a pattern to go over top of it for quilting. So here I am in the Electric Quilt 8 system. I will be making one large block. Instead of making an entire quilt, I'm only going to do one block. And my block is going to be a finished 8-inch block. So first thing I need to do is put a block into the pattern. So I'm going to set the block, and I have chosen this mosaic pattern. It's going to be a fun pattern to do in that paper piecing or the foundation piecing. So in order to print this, I will need to go into the print section. I am on layer 1. Once I'm in the print section, I do need to choose the block, and we'll be able to see that with those green outlines. And from here, these are my options. I'm going to print a foundation piece. This gives me a preview, and I can go into that preview and see what I have. It's telling me right now I'm going to need 4 pieces of paper, but I'm going to be able to rearrange this a little bit so I can get it in 2 pieces of paper. Just click on a block and move it out of the way. And then I can rearrange these. This block, instead of having it come on 2 pages, I'm going to be able to rotate it. And just keep rotating it until it gets on that page. For these 2 long pieces, I will need to rotate them. So just click on it and rotate. Click and drag. This one I need to rotate. And click and drag. So now I have all of my foundations complete on 2 pieces of paper, and they all fit in that page. I can now print it, and just go up and print. And there goes my printer. It's printing my page for me. I do want to find a quilting design that will fit this 8-inch block. So I will go back into my design, and since I'm doing a quilting design that's going to go over top, I will go to layer 3. And from here, I want to move over to stencils. I did choose a stencil previous, but they're very easy to find. We go into our libraries, our block library, and when we scroll down, we have the stencils here, and we can use any of these stencils and just add them to the sketchbook and pull them over. But in this case, I do want to use this design. So I'm just going to click it over. In order to edit it, I do need to do some adjustments. And I do have all of these that I can click on, but it's just very easy to click and drag. So from here I could adjust this to the size that I want. So once I have it the size that I want, I'm going to be able to print it. And I'll be able to print it as many times as I want. If I have a quilt that has 9 blocks, I'll be able to print it 9 times. But in this case, I'll only need to print it once. So I'll go to the print. I do need to select what I want. And now I'm going to be able to print my block. When I print the block, I do have some choices. I could do it as an applique, but in this case, I do want to do it as a stencil. Let's give it a preview. You can see here that this is giving me that exact size that I'm going to need to quilt. So, print. So now that these are printed, let's take a close look at them. So the newsprint is definitely a lot thinner. I had no problem putting it through the printer, but if you find your printer is taking more than one page, you can change a setting on your printer to have thinner paper, or just put the sheets in one at a time. So here is regular printer paper and the newsprint. This is definitely going to be a lot harder to rip than this. It is very, very soft and gentle. And it's also a lot easier to stitch through the newsprint than regular paper. So I have my pages done, and this is going to make the quilt block. They've already been numbered for me. You can always renumber them on the program. And there's that stencil that I'm going to be able to use to do the quilting. So let's build one of these blocks. Each one of these units will be put together separately, and then we're going to be able to put the blocks together. So I'm just going to cut them out, and I'm not worried about the outside edges. So let's start and put together this larger unit. We're going to be stitching on this paper side. So what we're going to need to do is put our fabric on the back side. And because it's a square, the square is going to be really easy for me just to measure and make a piece larger. And it needs to go on the back. I know I will not be sewing on those two sides, so I'll just put the pins there just to hold things out of the way. Once that first piece is done, we need to figure out where our next stitching line is. And for that, we need to refer back to that front. The C1 is our first piece. Our C2 is going to be the next piece. So our stitching line will be this line right here. But we need to find that onto the other side. There are a few ways we can do it. You can get special tools to do it, but you can also use a credit card or a thin piece of plastic and just place it right along that seam line and fold that paper back along that card or that piece of plastic. You can see I have definitely more than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what I want to do is make a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we can just take that ruler and have it go a 1/4 inch past that fold line. When that piece is removed, we now have that perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now we need a piece that's going to fit here. I'll need to make sure that this paper piece matches the fabric piece, but with the fabric upside down. So I need to make sure that fits. And that is going along the back. So we're sewing upside down. These are just giving us our sewing lines. Once those seams are matched up, I will be stitching along this edge. If we put the pins in the fabric and turn it over, this is where we need to stitch. We really can't see where those pins are going to go. So I always recommend to put those pins anywhere outside the seam allowance. I know this is going to be my seam, so I'm going to pin anywhere away from it. I just want to hold that fabric down. My seam is running along here, and my pins will not be in the way. Now I can turn this over, bring it to the machine, and stitch right along this edge. The one thing I do recommend is you take your stitches and make them really small. If you normally have a 2.5, make them small to about a 2. And start off of that paper and stitch on that line and come right off that paper. You can see how those pins were not in the way. I now can remove those pins and press this fabric over. Now I'm going to be able to do the second side. So I will need to find that seam allowance. A business card, piece of plastic, something thin to fold that paper back. Now I need to trim off a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I need to choose my next piece. The fabric does need to look reversed from this side because it's going underneath. Just turn it over, and I know where that's going to go now. I can flip, match up those edges. This is going to be my stitching line. So I'm going to take the pins out of my way. Now flip this over and stitch starting here. Go over that 1/4 inch seam allowance and keep stitching all the way off. That second piece has been stitched on. My pins were not in the way. I can remove them and press that over. So this is the back and this is the front. And for a block like this that has a lot of bias, I will just add a little piece of glue right there in that corner. You can use fabric glue, but I don't mind just using a little child's glue stick that is washable. And I just want to put the glue so that it would be right here on this point, but on this side. And I'll do that to both sides. Now I don't have to worry about that fabric flipping out of the way. Turn it over and trim on the outside lines. So I have my first piece done and ready to go. Some pattern pieces start from the center and go out. Others are going to start on one edge and go down completely. But the one thing that is in common, fold that back on that stitching line. Make sure that we cut that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure that that fabric fits with that wrong side. Turn it over. Match up those seams and stitch. Now that I have all of the pieces done, I'm going to be able to start sewing them together. These two pieces are going to go together and those seams will match up. I've left that paper on and I'm still going to be following that seam. By leaving the paper on, it is stabilizing all of these seams so nothing is stretching out of shape. And I know my points are going to match. And when we pull that open, you really can see how perfect those points match up. Now, if you're making a quilt, you would just continue to make as many as you need and then sew them together. We need to take the paper off at the very last moment. So just for this video, I will be putting a simple border around the outside. We can now just remove the paper. And it's very easy to rip off because it is newsprint. With that paper off, I now have a perfect block with perfect little points. And the added bonus is I have a quilting design that is going to fit it perfectly. So I'm going to be able to sandwich my quilt together, put this paper on top, and just quilt right over top of it, following these lines. And then take this paper off, just like I did the back. To quilt this, I just pinned that paper on, pulled the bobbin thread up to the top, and followed my stitching. I will tie these off after, but now I get to remove the paper. And it's stitched perfectly fine going through all of those layers. The newsprint definitely makes it easy. Now just rip off that paper. My stitching is perfect, my points are perfect, that paper came off easily, and all that piecing and quilting was done on a regular home sewing machine. This is a fun project for something small like this, or we can do entire quilts. So the newsprint is a perfect weight of fabric, not only to go through the printers, but to stitch on or to stitch through. So we can do foundation piecing and we could do quilting. It's a fun way to try new patterns and new quilt designs. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. Come and visit me on Facebook and Instagram. Sign up to my newsletter. It's all under Sew Very Easy. Thanks again. Bye now.